Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Behavioral Health webinar series. My name is Ella Driscoll, and today Avis Garcia will be presenting The Strength of Our People, Resilience of Native Americans, Part 1. This training is brought to you by the National American Indian and Alaska Native Addiction Technology Transfer Center. We are part of the ATTC network out of Iowa City, Iowa. In the next couple of days, we will send you a follow-up email that includes a link to the recording, a handout of the slides, and CEU request instructions. We are a NADAC certified educational provider, and we are currently waiving fees for CEUs throughout the pandemic. Again, the follow-up email will contain instructions for ordering your CEUs. Following today's webinar, you will be redirected to our GIPRA evaluation. This is just a quick survey that takes a few minutes to complete and asks you about your satisfaction with our event. This feedback is critical to our future work, and we greatly value your opinion of your time spent with us. You will be muted for the duration of this webinar. Please use the chat to share your questions and comments, and we will address them as well as we can at the end, or even address them in future sessions. Today, we will be hearing from Avis Garcia. She is an enrolled member of the Northern Arapaho Nation and affiliated with the Eastern Shoshone Tribe of Wyoming. She earned her doctorate in counselor education at the University of Wyoming, and she is a licensed professional counselor as well as a licensed addiction therapist. For 19 years, she has been a mental health provider in the treatment of Native American youth and families. With that, I want to give a warm welcome to Dr. Garcia. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks. Let me get it to slideshow. I can't remember how long ago it was, but I was doing a presentation, and at the end of the presentation, one of the participants had asked for some information on resiliency, and wanting to meet the request, I've done some research and I've done a lot of work to pull this presentation together today. And as I was doing my research, I was just sharing with the ladies earlier before we logged on that a lot of the information that I found was geared towards children and youth and adolescents. So I had to do some work to find more information specific to the adult population, and also specific to the Native American population. And so today I'm presenting this presentation that I put a lot of work into. I called it the Indigenous Path to Resiliency, because a lot of us come from reservations like myself. We can go on ahead and go to the next slide. I like to preface presentations, especially when I'm presenting to the Native American population across the country, because I don't want to have people saying I'm speaking for all natives when I'm not. I speak mainly from being raised as a Northern Arapaho. I'm Eastern Shoshone on my father's side, but I'm enrolled Arapaho. And I just like to let people know that I speak from my viewpoint, and that there are a lot of generalizations among the 560 federally recognized tribes that are in the United States. So I try to be careful not to use other information. And I do a lot of research. I'm one of those people that, as a PhD, a lot of my dissertation, I spent like 3 or 4 years just doing research. So I've saved a lot of my work. My dual perspective here is as a scholar, and my experience as a person who's lived most of my life on the Wind River Reservation. I currently reside in Cheyenne, Wyoming, which is the capital of our state, and I'm an executive director of an outpatient nonprofit substance abuse treatment agency. And so I have a lot of experience in working with substance abuse and counseling that is specific to the Native American population. We could change to the next slide. As I was doing some research, I came across this quote from Charles Eastman. And one of the things that I learned in my own personal research for Native Americans, I studied the Northern Arapaho men in my tribe, and what I was looking for was what were their success factors that enabled them to complete their undergraduate degree at the University of Wyoming. And Charles Eastman is a well-known historical figure who was of the Lakota tribe who earned a physician's degree. And he practiced as a medical professional on the reservation. And his quote was, "My desire is to use all that I learned for my people's benefit." And through all of the research that I've done looking at success factors of college students who have successfully completed their degrees, is that we think collectively. We don't go to get a degree for ourselves and we're gonna get rich and do this American dream thing. We all share the perspective of we want to help our people in our community. So, and our family, we're not focused on us. We're a collective people. And a lot of these universities that are off the reservation aren't created for Native Americans. So it puts a lot of stress on us when we enter the university because the teachers don't consider our learning styles are different and our values are different and how we think is different. So this came across in my research as that of being a shapeshifter. And the shapeshifter is that we're having to kind of go back and forth when we're in the classroom. And I shared with other people. I presented to a university in Nebraska recently, and I shared with the students that when I was in my master's program, I was the only Native American in that program. When I went for my PhD, I was the only Native American in my program. So as a first generation student, I've learned that you're going to be, but more of us, more and more, the number of college students is more than quadrupling now, and people that are earning degrees that are Native American is increasing. So that's really, really makes me feel good because I want to see us rise up and change this world because we can do it. And that there is more evidence that's showing that Native Americans are acquiring more mainstream college degrees. My son has 2 degrees in psychology and criminal justice, and my oldest daughter is getting her master's in social work. So I'm really proud of my kids. I myself, and I share this with everyone, especially in the treatment field, because I run into a lot of patients who do not have a college degree or a high school diploma. And so I did not graduate high school. So when I talk about resiliency, I speak from experience. I'm a high school dropout, and my first attempt at college was a total failure because I didn't know what I was doing. And being the first person in my family, I had nobody to guide me or show me the way. So a lot of what I've accomplished has been from my life experience. We can go on to the next slide. As I was looking up the word to resiliency, and especially for adults, the definition seemed to focus on trauma exposure, and that those who are resilient, it doesn't lead to psychological distress. That people who are resilient have the remarkable ability to recover. People who are resilient also flourish after exposure to trauma. They become more stronger. They find new coping strengths, new coping mechanisms and insight, and have an appreciation for life, more thoughtful about life choices, and it changes people in a positive way. I tell people to look for the silver lining. I've always been one who has been an optimist, who no matter what the situation, I'm gonna look for what was good about it. And the definition I have is resilience is possible in the face of extreme adversity. Go to the next slide. Some psychosocial factors of resiliency is that of being optimistic. We have cognitive flexibility. We have active coping skills. We know what works in certain situations. We're able to recall this one time when I had this bad experience. This is how I got through it. So we're able to use that. We have strong support networks. You have friends or coworkers, people that are positive in your life, and even elders. You know, I communicate a lot with my elders on the reservation, and they are good people who are really good support network people. People who are resilient are attentive to their physical well-being. This means that we take care of our physical health, we exercise, we're mindful of what we're consuming, what we're eating, and we also possess a personal moral compass. And that was in an article that I read by Lockeviello and Charney in 2014. These factors can be cultivated as buffers against traumatic events or increased by therapeutic interventions. Enhancing all of these promotes resilience. So we can go to the next slide. Cultural resiliency. In the research I was doing, Peacock's definition was the incorporation of traditional practices and ways of thinking as a means to overcome oppression and other negative obstacles faced by the Native American population. A strengths perspective, we all have positive attributes and appropriate choice as a means to survive. Working in substance abuse treatment, prevention programs are more focused towards youth in building their strong identities, and also looking at women's wellness in a lot of the research that I reviewed for this presentation. We can go to the next slide. Some of the cultural resilience factors that are effective coping mechanisms that came out in the research that I did for this presentation. The top one was spirituality. Native Americans, we just naturally have a sense of spirituality. It's how we think, it's how we live our day-to-day lives. And we have strong family support networks, and it's very important to feel like we belong. And in my family, it wasn't just our immediate family, we have extended family. So my aunts are our mothers, and my uncles are our fathers, and my cousins are my brothers and sisters, and my family and myself, we adopt other people into our lives. We take children in. My grandmother, I've had an uncle all my life, and my grandmother said he didn't have a mom, so she took him in as part of the family, and he's still my uncle to this day. Elders, we respect our elders, and we take care of our elders, and we also practice our ceremonial rituals as resilient people. And all tribes, I believe, have had some sort of trauma that they've gone through. And although I could cover that, if you guys want me to talk more about that later, I can do another presentation on intergenerational trauma. But being a Northern Arapaho, we had the Sand Creek Massacre in 1868 here in November in Wyoming and the Colorado border area. And so a lot of tribes have survived, and I am a descendant of the Sand Creek Massacre. So I know a lot of the trauma and the history, but practicing our ceremonial rituals was banned at one time, but we never stopped doing them. We've continued to do them. And the Arapaho tribe is one of the few that still practices their ceremonial rituals. Another common resilience factor is the oral traditions. When we were nomadic people, and in some sense we still are, because we move for survival. And we couldn't take notebooks, and computers didn't exist, so everything was through story. So everything we taught was through telling stories and listening, and so that's how a lot of the knowledge was passed on. The other cultural resilience factor I identified in my research was tribal identity. That is being proud of who you are, being proud to be whatever tribe it is you come from. and also having your support networks, whoever it is, even if it's just one person who is there for you when you need it. We can go to the next slide. Another one that stands out, and this came out in my own dissertation research that I did on the men in my tribe who graduated from the university that I also graduated from, was prayer. A lot of these men had talked about this is what got them through, is they always had those spiritual prayers with themselves to help themselves get through some difficult times while they were attending college off the reservation. So a lot of our spirituality is demonstrated through our prayers, maintaining our humbleness, and that, and for me, being humble is how I was raised. Is you never put yourself out there as better than people, that we're all the same. And I was also taught that it's disrespectful if I were to put myself above people, and I really avoid trying to do that. We pray about stress factors in our life. You know, sometimes we're having a challenging time, and prayer is what helps us to get through that. Gratitude. In treatment, I tell a lot of our clients to have an attitude of gratitude. Even if you just look for one thing at the end of the day, what one thing was good about your day? And just practicing that helps you to realize that there's simple things in life that we're grateful for, especially like just having water to drink. Another one is prayer for perseverance, to focus, to help us with stress reduction, for courage in difficult situations, and to help us with decision making. We can go on to the next slide. Cultural connectedness is also a resiliency factor. A lot of tribes have been removed from their homeland, and sacred sites have been left. As time went on, our hunting was restricted. At one time on our reservation, we used to be able to go hunt when I was a kid anytime we felt like it. And now we have hunting seasons. And yeah, I miss the old times. And cultural ceremonies have been disrupted. And our culture is our biggest resilience factor that we have. Tribes have this incredible resilience to face oppression and this forced relocation and colonization, genocide. We're still here. Every year, this last year we didn't because of the COVID, we have the Denver March Powwow. And I always look forward to that because for the Arapaho people, Denver, Colorado was our homeland that we were removed from because the colonizers wanted to take it. So we were literally removed from our area. Destruction of families through boarding schools and aggressive removal by child welfare agencies. My grandparents were had been a part of the boarding school era, and I've heard their stories of the traumatic experiences that they went through, and I've also spoken with other people from other tribes that have experienced a lot of trauma by being in the boarding school. And my grandparents, my grandmother left the boarding school in the 8th grade, and my grandfather actually ran away from the boarding school in the 6th grade because he was struggling with learning the English language, and I have to think of how resilient he was to be able to run away from the school in the middle of nowhere and make it home to his family that adopted him and raised him. And I never got to ask him, how did you know which way to go? How did you get there? Because I heard of other children that tried to run away and they didn't survive. They died trying to run away. So I guess I'm grateful for my grandfather for having been able to survive that. Several years ago, before the Indian Child Welfare Act, several children were placed in homes that were non-native homes, and so they went through a lot of abuse and trauma being raised by people they were unfamiliar with. There was also the prohibition of spiritual practices with the Indian Religious Crimes Act of 1883, and that made any native tribe who was trying to practice their cultural religious ceremonies against the law. So they had to go into hiding just to continue the ceremonies. It wasn't until 1978 that the American Indian Religious Freedoms Act was passed that allowed us to practice our ceremonies without breaking the law, so to speak. We can go on to the next slide. Again, looking at the factors of resiliency for Native Americans, again, I reiterate that spirituality is the core of our survival. It is where we learn our teachings to honor our traditional values and strengthen indigenous worldviews. This is from an article by Runner and Morris in '97. Those who have greater identification with spirituality have also been shown to have lower drug use and be more successful with alcohol cessation, because I'm always looking at what will help with drug and alcohol treatment, because that's the kind of work that I've been doing for a long time. And also, spirituality helps with our general well-being and to help us have more positive mental health. Go to the next slide. Those with resiliency, I'm just now seeing a typo and I apologize for that. Those that are thriving, about 55% of Native Americans, I just thought this was some interesting statistics that I found. 55% of Native Americans own their own home. 75% have a high school diploma, and 14% have a bachelor's degree. So these are people that are thriving and being successful. Go into the next slide. Our Native humor is probably also one of our greatest resiliency factors. Sometimes when there's serious things going on in our lives, something funny happens and we all laugh. And there are some stereotypical beliefs that Native Americans are solemn and we're stoic, and a lot of people who don't even know about Native culture still think, you know, we're living in our teepees and we're wearing war bonnets. And so a lot of times, especially when I was at the university, I tell people that we live in our teepees at certain times of the year, and we use our teepees for a lot of our ceremonies. And our humor is alive and well. Every now and then when I want to laugh, you can get on YouTube and you can type in Native American comedy and you'll find all the Native American comedians. And, you know, I get some good laughs from that. So I was going to try to include that in here, but if you guys just go to YouTube and type that in, you'll find some people on there that are Native comedians, and they're pretty good. It is a critical function of our daily interaction by Garrett Walkingstick. It's a critical part of our culture at mealtimes. Native Americans come together around food. We like to laugh and tease each other. And laughter has been proven by research that it relieves stress and it creates a sense of connectedness. So that's a good part of our culture. And for those that are existing in a non-native world, this is a quote by Mary Black Bonnet, who is an Osage lady. She says, "We have to dress in a certain way, go by the clock time. We're always serious at work, a place where money is all that counts, with how much we earn and how we earn it. I walk a fine line and keep one foot in each world." So this quote just really resonated with me, of seeing how much we have to change. And if you look at some of the older pictures that are the black and white photos of natives who before boarding school and after they got in, you'll see the huge difference in their hairstyles and the way they dressed. And the boarding schools were there to get rid of the Indian and make us more like the European people, which has just been not a good thing. You can go to the next slide. Tribal identity. I pulled this information out of a 2014 article by Garrett Walking Stick. It says our language is disappearing at an alarming rate. According to Russell, 98% of our native population is tribally mixed. I can speak to that. I am Arapaho and Shoshone. 75% of our native population is racially mixed. I have a couple of nieces who are Mexican, Black, and Arapaho. So a lot of our people have married into other races. Indigenous speakers are valuable resources. I was sharing with my uncle, my husband last night, that my uncle was one of my grandparents' only child who still speaks the language, and he sings the songs. And my mom, I never really heard her speak the language, but being raised by my grandparents is where I learned from. When I started at the university in 2013, I was saddened to hear that the Arapaho language is considered an endangered language. And so my tribe now is working really, really hard to preserve our language. We now have a language app that I have on my phone. The University of Wyoming is teaching the Arapaho language. And interestingly, it's a Mexican girl who's teaching our Arapaho language. She's very good with our language. And because of the Native American Indigenous Language Act of 1990, a lot of federal funding and effort is being placed into preserving Native tribes. And to my knowledge, not many tribes are fluent in their language. The few that I know are the Navajo, which are one of the largest tribes. My youngest daughter is half Navajo when we talk about tribally mixed. And then the Crow people, and then a lot of the Lakota people. And I continue to practice what I know. And someone put in the Northern Cheyenne. Okay, we can go to the next slide. The economic development of the 565 federally recognized tribes, 40% own and operate casinos. Our tribe has 3 casinos on our reservation. 1% of Native Americans own and operate a business. And I really like that people are doing that. I have a friend who just opened his own little restaurant and catering business on the reservation, and he's doing very well. And we also have those who continue to struggle economically. And here in Wyoming, the Northern Arapaho tribe is actually one of the largest employers in the county of Fremont County, and they employ a lot of non-native people there as well. We can go on to the next slide. 16. Cultural preservation. Almost every tribe has some type of program in education, health, and community activities to encourage pride and tribal traditions. There is increased control of our cultural resources, preservation, and maintenance. One of our casinos has like a museum in it now, and now we actually have someone who has a degree in museum work, and he is working on creating a museum for our tribe on our reservation. So I'm pretty excited about that. As time has gone on, we're getting some of our belongings returned to us from museums and people across the country that wish to return them. There are also programs inside and outside of schools that focus on our cultural preservation. The programs that we normally have because of this COVID this year, another thing that made me feel bad is a lot of it was canceled because of that. But every summer we have camps where elders come and teach the kids how to cut meat, how to speak the language, how to put up a teepee. A lot of our cultural practices that we need to continue are taught. They do a lot of traditional arts and crafts. I like to do beadwork in my spare time. The language. It's very important that we preserve our language. Even if you just know some words, it's good to pass those on and use it. Our songs, our chants, as well as dancing is part of our cultural preservation and also the preservation of our tribal traditions. Go on to the next slide. Some of the challenges that we face, and the graduation rates is what led me to my dissertation that I wrote on my tribe. And the Native Americans have some of the lowest graduation rates. Colorado has a 52%, Nevada and Oregon 52%, Alaska and Wyoming is 51%, South Dakota and Minnesota. See, South Dakota is 49% and Minnesota is 42%. The average income for Native American people is about $35,000 and $35,192 compared to the entire nation of $50,502. And poverty is still on the reservation, 30% compared to the entire US of 26%. But when you take a strengths-based perspective, reverse these numbers to give more positive. So instead of saying the lowest graduation rate, we could say, hey, 48% of our people are finishing. That's good. That's a good thing. And so a lot of the research that's done, usually by non-native people, takes a deficit perspective. So they focus on all the problems that we have, and that's where all these stereotypes come from. So a lot more natives that are pursuing higher education are doing research, and we're changing that deficit to a strengths-based perspective. We're focusing on the good things that we want to see our people doing. We can go to the next slide. Some important characteristics. This is from Thornton, Collins, and Doherty in a 2006 article that they wrote. Important characteristics for resiliency is stable peer relationships, problem-solving skills, having realistic future plans, a positive sense of ability to achieve and deal with tasks, the ability to communicate effectively. I've had to share with my own daughter. She was, of my 3 children, one of the most shy of all. And now I'm so proud of her. She actually organizes events at the University of Wyoming, and she'll be one of the main speakers. And she gets up and talks in Arapaho, and it just makes me so proud of her. But I remember she was afraid in her undergraduate degree of having to take the public speaking class. And I told her I had to overcome that in my master's program, it was constant presentation. So we have to face those challenges to get where we want to go. And so I'm glad that she's learning to speak up. A lot of the work that I've done on the reservation, especially with kids, is a lot of them really don't want to speak up, and they're very quiet. So it takes work to get them to come out of their shells. You have a strong attachment to at least one adult. This came through in my research with my tribe and a lot of the research that I did of other tribes. And having that one person, and I want to say for myself, it was my grandmother. She was the one who was always there for me. She never drank. She kept a safe home and made sure that I was always well taken care of. And so I always like to say that I feel that I've done something to make her proud of having raised me the way she did. And also, people that are resilient are accountable for their self and their actions. So they're not going to blame someone else or something for whatever happens. If they do something wrong, I'll admit it. Hey, I messed up. I'll learn from this mistake, so I don't do this again. We can go to the next slide. This is an example of the pictures I was talking about. If you see on the left-hand side, these are the same children who are in this picture who, how they traditionally were dressed. And then later, after they got into the boarding school, of how their hair was cut and their clothing style was changed. And for the Arapaho people, we only cut our hair when we have a loss of a family member. And it is a ceremony that we do in our grieving process. And so this, to me, is like, yeah, these kids had a whole lot of loss. So cutting their hair, from my perspective, is something that we do when we've had a big loss in our family. And as I shared, we've all experienced a lot of intergenerational and historical trauma with colonization. Like I said, my tribe has experienced the Sand Creek Massacre, where several women and children in the middle of winter were lost their lives and were killed by the U.S. cavalry. And the men were out hunting, doing what men did at that time. That was how they took care of the people, was they hunted. Also, the boarding school, the federal and state policies that restrict a lot of our freedoms, and oppression and discrimination. So these are some risk factors that we continue to face as time goes on. And research that I did on intergenerational trauma is epigenetics work is actually discovered that those traumas are encoded in our genes within our body, so it can be passed on that way. You can go to the next slide. Some more protective factors is from Daryl, Angel, and Jones in 2003. They talked about risk and resiliency among Native Americans. And this is came from an article on parolees and former prisoners. So this is where I got this information from. So our protective factors, again, are ceremonies and tradition. The greater we engage in our traditional culture will lead to more positive outcomes for our children. And on our reservation, when I worked with the juvenile probation people after work from my other job, we had a sweat lodge for our youth that were on probation, our juvenile delinquents. And every week we had a sweat lodge. Every week we had a talking circle. And again, you know, when it was all over, we had people that cooked. We had a big meal. So a lot of these kids that come from homes that were engaging in delinquent acts and getting in trouble with the law, they didn't have native names, and maybe their families didn't even know about the sweat lodge or other practices that we have. So the program that we had included elders, and we would have a sweat lodge for them. Maybe we gave them a name so they could be proud of who they were. I was raised that you know, you give your children names, their Indian names, and mine was passed down from my great-grandmother, and my name is Deitas, and in Arapaho that means strong woman, and I believe that name has protected me and taken me far. Also, the community-centric orientation. Again, we focus on our communities. There's a quote from someone says, being a Lumbee accords members a self-reliant, interdependent identity whereby individuals care for and are cared for by one another. And oftentimes when I'm at ceremonies, I hear the elders speak and they say, love one another, take care of each other. And again, our humor, it keeps us laughing and makes us happy when we're having some difficult times. You can go on to the next slide. I like to focus on the trauma-informed care. Working in drug and alcohol treatment, I want to say 99% of the people have experienced some type of trauma. And using trauma-informed care, we would speak to the person by saying, what happened to you, instead of what's wrong with you. Programs must be based on tribal not external norms. A lot of these interventions and treatment theories are all based on European and Western culture and not from the tribal perspective. So I've always focused on how it fits my people and how it will work with my people. And I also find things that won't work. And again, we draw on our ancestors' resilience and survival skills. I've told my own children that my grandparents told me when they got married, they didn't have a home. They lived in a tent. And long ago, like I said, our people were nomadic and we moved where the buffalo went. And so they had to be resilient to go through the cold when it's cold, cold, cold outside. I often think of my ancestors and think, man, they had to be some tough people to survive what they did so that we could be here. We can go on to the next slide. Our mental health. This is some interesting information I pulled from the research that I did. Individuals with some college education or a college degree are less likely to be depressed than those with less education. And again, I'm not going to say that people that don't have education can't be resilient and have good mental health. Like I said, I really feel like my grandparents who had a 6th and 8th grade education have taught me the most in this life of mine. Native elders always maintain a positive outlook, even through significant adversity. Our elders can be seen as our role models. And storytelling is a traditional resiliency factor. This often includes stories of personal challenge. My grandparents told me stories that they heard when they were younger of, like I have, one of my relatives who was female was captured, and how she was able to escape was someone helped her to escape when she was captured, and she hid in the rock. So these different stories, it was just amazing to hear that our stories actually will reflect some resiliency challenges. Health and balance. We can go to the next slide. This comes from Indian Health Services article in 2018. It says diabetes is the 4th leading cause of death for Native people in 2009. Native Americans have high rates of recreational tobacco use, obesity, and inactivity. We also have low fruit and vegetable consumption. We also have a lot of different cancers and low seatbelt compliance, along with high fat and low fiber diets. Again, I'm guilty of that. I've actually shed some weight, and it hasn't been easy, but it's changing a lot of your eating and becoming more active. And the research that I had says 80% of Native adults ages 20 through 74 are overweight, and significant implications for a variety of health problems, diabetes, high blood pressure. I'm on my blood pressure medication, and I'm waiting to see if I can go off my medication. And respiratory problems and cancer. We have a lot of psychological distress, and there is a lack of familiar support is linked to excess weight. So those people who don't have family support or people to support them, and the research that was presented from the Indian Health Services in 2018 showed that this is a common theme that showed up in their work. Culturally based spirituality is associated with lower weight and a weight loss program. And this is from research done by Deal in 2015. So this really, again, emphasizes our spirituality is important resiliency factor to our people. We can go on to the next slide. Some interventions needed. One of the things that I've seen really change, and I would say this last decade has been increased fitness programs on our reservation. Our tribe has a gym at one of our halls, and in the other end of I think every main area of our reservation is some type of gym with equipment and people that are hired to teach fitness classes. And I have some good friends who started their own CrossFit gym, and that is really awesome because a lot of people that go there have really changed. Native Americans, again, have high rates of obesity, recreational tobacco, and I think I covered this in the other slide that I have. So there is a high need to improve our physical health. And I'm always reminding my grandkids that they don't need to have soda and lots of candy, and looking out for their health as well. We can go on to the next slide. Most of the research on natives is, again, I said deficit-based and focuses on our risk factors for health conditions. So I'm one of those who's going to take a strengths-based approach to all the work that I do, because not just natives, people that I work with here off the reservation in substance abuse treatment respond well to strength-based approaches. So the strength-based approach acknowledges successive outcomes and the majority who do not have substance abuse problems. So when we see that, we're using our strength-based approach. They build on individual and cultural strengths. Traditional healing, again, is effective and empowering and culturally grounded. And I can attest to that. Every trauma I've been through, our traditional ways is what healed me and got me back on my feet. Our cultural practice and spirituality are a buffer against substance misuse and mental health issues that promote pro-social behaviors. Next slide is our cultural elements. Reclaiming any aspect of your traditional culture, our language, our spirituality can have health benefits. And technology can also be used, like we're using today, to enhance our wellness. Webinars and telehealth modules like this can be effective ways to educate our people. So it is real important that we have a sense of belongingness, which can help reduce shame, smudging, our sweat lodge, our prayer, our talking circles. Our cultural promotes our healing and wellness and buffers us against stress. And another article was reflect on the strength and resilience associated with survival that counteracts depression. You can go to the next slide on hope and resilience. People can recover traditions and celebrate survival. Braveheart cautions that we don't dismiss trauma because it can cause people to shut down, especially if it's oversimplified and glorified. Reclaiming traditions does not mean acting like it's still the 1800s. Learn your language, even if it's not to the point of fluency, can be empowering. Language is a form of resistance that counteracts cultural genocide. Go on to the next slide. Screen time. This is one I've really been working on. It says adults as well as youth spend an average of 3.5 hours a day looking at our computers, our cell phones, our iPads, the video games, and it causes some serious health concerns for obesity and other health risks. We have the higher health problems compared to non-native people, especially highest among the males. And it's the screen time is high among overweight individuals and males, and TV watching is the most popular screen time. And the youth, it's those video games. Substance misuse on the next slide. Interestingly, the research that I looked at showed that substance misuse was higher in the northern areas versus the southern areas. Identity is often shaped through racism that impacts our sense of self and belonging. A lot of people abuse substances just to numb themselves against cumulative stress. So if they're having trauma or whatever they're experiencing, they've learned to cope by using substance. So that is really hard for them to give up. They can't just give it up tomorrow. It takes a long time, and sometimes it takes several times. But studies do show substance use is lower in communities, but those who do drink often drink with a heavy pattern of episodic drinking, the binge drinking. And I also found this out in my research on my own reservation, where I did an epidemiological study of my tribe. And not all Native Americans misuse alcohol. Unusually high abstinent rate from alcohol use. I know many people on my reservation that do not use drugs or alcohol, and raised by my grandparents, I was told those are the best people, that if they don't use drugs or alcohol, those are good people. We can go on to the next slide. This is another article that I found on self-determination and sovereignty. The inclusion of traditional beliefs and cultural practices within a Western institution of health equals improved health status of Indigenous people. So any agency that takes into consideration that we have our own ways of learning and teaching, and that being who we are and maintaining who we are is important to our survival. You can go to the next slide. For those of you that are helpers, it's very important that we practice self-care, especially when we hear stories of trauma. It's just as the buffalo puts her head down in the blizzard and continues to walk through that blizzard knowing that it's going to get better on the other side, just shows how many people can weather many storms and continue for our future. It helps. Taking care of yourself cultivates a sense of balance and nurtures your own need for wellness. It's very important that we get the rest when we need to rest, because our brain needs to heal too. You need to develop your own plan that makes sense to you and use it. Our artistic expression can be effective to promoting healing. So many people that are Native, I know, are excellent artists. My brother is an excellent artist. I like to brag about him. Consistent with self-care is important. So anything you do that helps you to be well, even if it's taking a walk or eating more vegetables. And learning to listen without taking on the burden is very hard. So those of you that help people, I pray for them. That's what helps me to deal with that. And avoid compassion fatigue. We tend to want to take on too much and do too much, but a lot of it is just there to support. We can't solve people's problems, but being support for them is really helpful. The next slide. Wellness and resilience can provide healing from historical trauma and help Native families recognize and let go of oppression. So balancing with a counter narrative of resilience. Positive aspects can be passed down intergenerationally, not just trauma. Like I said, I learned some good things from my grandparents. Our language, again, our ceremonies, positive parenting, culture, and a strong sense of identity and belonging, and also promoting that return to our traditional practices. That's key to our future. Next slide. Where do we go from here? This presentation has been inspiring and affirming for me. It has pulled me in new directions and informed how I think and how I speak, and I hope that it'll do the same for you. We still have a lot to learn from our elders. They are well versed in needs and strengths of the community as to what has succeeded and what has failed in the past. Helping professionals like you have the ability to make a difference in your community, and narratives of continuity and resilience in the face of adversity can help us determine where we go from here. Remembering our ancestors who've always had ways of helping and restoring balance. Western helping professionals employ different methods, but they also cultivate wellness. They mean well. They don't mean to cause any harm, but they have to be educated. Our ancestors survived many challenges while attending to the well-being of future generations. So we're always thinking about our kids or who's coming after us. And the conclusion will end here. Just some notes that I took. Defining resiliency too narrowly can result in imprecise conceptualization. Again, humor is a big role of our resiliency, and the legacy of colonization in Indian communities has implicit effects on resiliency of individuals. So that adds to our historical trauma, and implementing and improving our research practices. So when I did my dissertation, I used indigenous research methods, which means I got to tell my story the way I wanted to tell it, and I got to write it in first person. So I was able to share what I know about my culture and my writing, and I shared that with my people as well. And thank you all for attending the session today.
Thank you so much. That was incredible. We do have one question. How would you suggest working from the trauma-informed perspective with urban natives who are removed or disconnected from their tribe?
Who are removed or disconnected from their tribe. Again, it is using that strength-based perspective, and I would also look at what got them to where they are now. How have they survived? Because like I shared, a lot of people that I encounter in my work have had numerous traumas in their life, myself included. So as things happened in my life, I did reflect back on, yeah, I got through this before, and this is how I got through it. So being able to look at what worked before in the past, and if they are in the urban areas, if you have access to do smudging with them, to pray with them, if there's access to a sweat lodge. The sweat lodge to me is universal throughout Indian country. Most tribes have different ways of doing the sweat lodge, and I noticed in my own two different tribes on my reservation that us Arapahoes like it super hot, and the Shoshone sweat lodge that I've been in was like not as hot as what I've been accustomed to. So being able to help them feel a belonging and connection to their tribal roots is really going to be effective from a trauma informed approach.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for presenting today. We all really appreciate you being here.